Let's talk about OpTic real quick because we're now about 45 minutes in, and we've talked about Atlanta and LAT, and they deserve to be talked about for 40 to 45 minutes for sure. We have to dedicate some time to OpTic, who we just talked about, two championship level teams competing at their very best, kind of testing each other and testing their own limits. OpTic did not have that kind of weekend. The team that entered as the number one seed going into Major One, they were 6-1 on a 6-match winning streak if you're just counting the major qualifiers, and then they come into winners round one, and we talked about this exact scenario where we're like, it seems pretty simple. It seems like it'll be OpTic, LAT, Toronto, and FaZe going to winner semis. It seems pretty clean, seems pretty chalked, and Atlanta does their job, they win 3-0. Toronto does their job, they win 3-0. LAT does their job, they win 3-1. OpTic Texas plays the hometown Miami Heretics, and they lose. I don't know if it was the Florida Mutineers curse. I don't know if it was them being in Spain playing against an all-Spanish team. I don't know if it was the Vickle buff.
It was Vickle.
But OpTic Texas loses 3-2 to the Miami Heretics in a massive upset, obviously, but it pretty much derails how OpTic's first few months of the CDL season has gone now, because it really is like, what have you done for me lately? That is traditional sports and esports all in one. What have you done for me lately? OpTic did incredible. They lost the first match of their season. Then they won 6 in a row. They get the number one seed, including beating Toronto, who hadn't been beaten in the qualifying matches to that point. They finish it on such a high note, and then they come into the major, and then they lose. They go to the loser's bracket. They win Game 5 against LAG. They eliminate the Gentlemates, and then they lose to Carolina in the losers round 2. They get knocked out with a top 8 finish. And this was part of the reason I did not pick OpTic, because I was like, I don't know if I can trust them. I've seen so many OpTic teams come in with a lot of hype and a lot of talent that they have, certainly, and they showed it. They won 6 matches in a row. They're one of the most talented teams, regardless of if they have Pred or if they have Hook. But this is why I can't pick them on a regular basis, and they kind of proved it. They lose to Carolina, they lose to Miami, top 8 finish. Overall thoughts on OpTic's kind of weekend from hell, because now this just creates conversation that they didn't have before. When they won all those matches, it was like, Hook's looking great, and this is a great roster. We don't need to make any changes. Now, top 8, those conversations start to crop up. Don't you agree?
I just the biggest difference, and I think it's if you paid attention to the event, or even if you didn't watch a ton and you just look at the results from these series at the major, the most glaring, I guess it is kind of a difference, but like the biggest thing is just OpTic's Hardpoint. I just went and looked, and I believe I don't know how updated the stats are for Breaking Point. They have the 3 results from the majors in here, so I'm gonna assume that it's updated with the majors. But I'm seeing a Hardpoint record on here of 14-10 for OpTic, and OpTic went 1-5 in Hardpoint at the major, which means they would have been 13-5 in Hardpoint heading into this event, and then they go 1-5 at this major, and that has to be the biggest difference, right? Like, and it's not even losing hard points to, FaZe or LAT. Like, they lost 2 hard points to Miami, who Miami had struggles in search, notably heading into this, and Game 5s, which Miami clutches up in the Game 5. But that doesn't necessarily mean like Miami was a bad hardpoint team. I would have to look at the record, but I don't necessarily consider them a great hardpoint team either. So, like, that is what it is. And, it's one series at that point. OpTic's 0-2 in Hardpoint, dropped down to the loser bracket. Very big upset, like you said. If OpTic had taken care of business there, we would have saw OpTic versus LAT, which would have been super hype. But we don't get that. Then they drop down and play Gentlemates, like you said, and Gentlemates in general just hasn't been a super strong team this year. They've notably had their own struggles. Um, and I know I at least brought up the point of like, that skyline hard point for Gentlemates, allowing pre-step potentially on a sub, potentially unlocking something for them there. Um, so I know at least at some point throughout Gentlemate's struggles overall, like they definitely had some. They definitely weren't a great hardpoint team. Their record in all three modes was probably very lackluster, though. Anyways, and once again, OpTic lose two hardpoints, two Gentlemates. They're able to clutch up in the game 5 though to win that series and stay alive in the tournament. And then they go into a match against Carolina, which Carolina we had already talked about multiple times now, like at least the analyst desk and Nameless and those guys mentioning that Carolina seemed like they were struggling in hardpoint themselves after the holiday break. And we get an instance where OpTic wins its first hardpoint, but it's 250 to 248. It was, literally a 2-point win. I remember it being a super close map. And that's their one hardpoint win of the majors, a 2-point win against another team that had its own struggles in the same mode. And then Carolina eliminates them on a Hacienda hardpoint. They win the next 3 maps, win 3-1 to give OpTic that 1-5 record in hardpoint at the major. And I think that's just that has to, like, again, if the breaking point numbers are fully updated and everything, 13-5 in the mode heading into the event. You think of OpTic historically as an organization, and maybe not even this team in particular, but you think of the players on this team, like they're strong hardpoint. You think of slaying,
Yeah, they're
one
always
in
a
five
slay
just
heavy team.
it doesn't add up, and it doesn't make sense for them to. So something obviously happened, and even there's a post match interview for Kenny. It would have had to have been after the Gentlemates match, I think, obviously, because they wouldn't have talked to them after the losses. And he even mentioned like he doesn't know what's going on in the hard points, and they got to go back and look at it. And that's when so that would have been before the Carolina match. They do win a hard point after that, but they obviously only win that one, and then they're eliminated soon after. If I look really quickly too, they would have been 0-1 in search against Carolina. They were 2-0 in search against Gentlemates. That's kind of interesting. And then they would have been 1-1, so 0-1, 1-2, 3-2 in search, so nothing really there. And then control, they won control against Miami, won the control against Gentlemates, and lost it to Carolina. So 2-1 there. So yeah, the 1-5 and hardpoint really stands out to me. And especially like I said, the caliber of players on that team, that's just not what you expect. And that's most notably that's gonna have to be what they look at and VOD review and try to figure out, because especially like I said, like those other modes, the records aren't anything crazy. So if they're able to figure out what went so wrong for them in hardpoint at this major and fix that, then OpTic should be in a good spot again moving forward. The team's got too much talent to not, to you don't expect them to be top 8 at major one, especially like you said, they had such a strong run leading up to this since the whole pred situation happened. So yeah, it comes back to hardpoint, and again, like historically for OpTic, it's usually the search. Like we've talked. You go back through.
They hate that too. They hate that reputation.
you go back to many Ego Chall podcasts, all the way back to season 1. Whenever we do it, we have talked about the OpTic organization historically, how they have slow starts at some tournaments, and that's what happens here. Like they lose day 1. That's something that has happened to previous, even the dynasty team for OpTic. It happened, and inexplicably, like it was a trend. It really didn't make sense, but it was a thing. And then they had a lot of series historically where they would win 3-1 even, and they would win 3 respawns but lose the S&D. There really has never been, at least in my mind, where a situation where an OpTic team just has had struggles in hardpoint like this to a 1-5 record. And it's not like a huge sample size. Like if this goes into the major two qualifiers and we're sitting here talking about like OpTic playing 7 matches in the major two qualifiers and having like a 1-10 hard point record or something like that, then yeah, I'd be super concerned. I'm only mildly concerned just because it really doesn't make sense for them to have a 1-5 record against like again, if they were 1-5 in hard point against FaZe, LA Thieves, and I don't know who the third best hard point team is. I'll say Toronto, but obviously
yeah.
OpTic just beat them.
Yeah.
If they were 1-5 against like 3 super strong teams, I wouldn't even be super concerned, or I'm not super concerned as is, but I would be less concerned than them being 1-5 against Miami, Carolina, and Gentlemates. That doesn't add up to me, and that's obviously the biggest thing OpTic will have to address in this little tune-up period we got before the major two qualifiers. And I believe their first match of the major two qualifiers is against Atlanta FaZe, so that will be very interesting.
You used concern and you were like, yeah, I'm not really concerned. I'm never really like concerned about OpTic in that sense because
Yeah,
this is just who they are. Like I always think of OpTic as like not inconsistent in the sense like they're going to go 500 all the time, but they could look like the best team and then the next weekend they're like, what the hell happened to you guys? Like it doesn't make sense. This has been a trend over multiple years, multiple rosters. Like it's not the same guys, and it happens year after year after year. And it's not like they need to blow up this team or anything. They just won champs, like I don't know, like 8 months ago or something.
and
And
what happened before champs?
yeah, and they lost like whatever 6 matches in a row right before that. And it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make because Atlanta does not do that. Like that's why we almost always pick FaZe, or like generally that's why like the early start to the season was like, what the hell is happening? Because FaZe in general is like they almost always win like 80 to 90% of their matches. Maybe they'll fall short at the major, but in general, like they're not going to get first rounded, or they're not going to, just look kind of clueless in some of these instances. And that's, you can't say that for OpTic. OpTic is one of those teams that they're kind of liable to, they're susceptible to upsets, I think. And I don't know why that is, because they have a really talented team. They seem to have like good coaching, and like JP and Karma seem like they kind of have it down pat. Uh, it I just don't know what the like connection is. Like, is it really just like Dashy? Like, because he's like the
No,
hold, yeah. Like, but that's really like the only thing I could think of is like he's like the only guy that's like connected to even like the OpTic like CWL roster. Like, not including Karma, but like that, it just doesn't make sense to me why this team would have the troubles it does at just kind of random points. Um, Unless they just, the practice in general, like the environment, the practice environment is just like kind of inconsistent, so it leads to inconsistent results. I'm just trying to come up with ideas for why this could be.
and I do think, it being a European event and the whole long travel and um minimal practice presumably before the actual event, because like you're taking days to try and get adjusted to the new time zone and whatnot. uh Again, not to like make excuses for OpTic, but that is at least worth bringing up here. I feel that like, maybe that's one potential thing that at least comes to mind for me. Because again, like if they were 13-5 before this 1-5 at the major, like if they just weren't tuned up because they had a couple days where they were traveling and jet lag, whatever the case may be, maybe that's a reasonable thing to say in this case. But I do, at the end of the day, it's just something kind of perplexing, and we'll have to see how they address it.
Always the thing that people bring up is like they do too much content, and that's why they like
Wow.
that. I saw a tweet and it was like like a viewer, I think, had said something to that effect, and then Hex was like flexing their trophies, and it's like, I mean, they won champs whatever 8 9 months ago, and uh, they definitely weren't expected to win champs, like at least going into that event. I I'm just always kind of perplexed by what what goes on with OpTic, and I you know
It,
that's I'm expecting them to win Major 2 now because that's kind of the roller coaster that they'll be on.
for one thing, I don't watch a ton of optic content. Like
Yeah, me
that's
neither.
not actually competitive stuff. But I don't. I mean, obviously, I'm subscribed to like optic on YouTube and stuff. I feel like I haven't really seen much content, like especially from the competitive team. Like I think they have like a show where they sit down the four players and like talk to each other. But I don't think it's like anything crazy. Like it's not like they're doing it every day. Or
No,
I
that's
feel
the
like they
reason for their
did
downfall.
so that's what I'm saying. Like I feel like this is a pretty quiet amount of period at least, and I could be off, but even let's just say they were doing like a content video every single day. That's optic. Like you wouldn't even be having this conversation of caring about optic doing content if all those like Nate Shot and Scump and all them didn't do content to begin with all those
Yeah.
years ago and make optic what it is today. So like there's got to be a give and take there. Like that's what optic is. It's not like, I'm just gonna say Vegas Falcons. Like we don't have Vegas Falcons doing a ton of content and becoming household names and being huge fan favorites. Like that's not what's happening right now. And they're like that's just what optic does. That's their recipe for success. And it was even I mean, Greenwald fans don't like to think about it, but there was a stretch there for a while in the early days of not early days, but like, competitive COD, like after uh Black Ops 1, they won a couple events in Black Ops 1, and then they did an MW3 when there wasn't the um
Yeah, they were in Apex.
there wasn't the actual competitive MLG circuit or whatever at that time. There was like the EU tournaments and whatever. And I think they obviously won the Chicago event with the nade shot push of Aches, but then they
And then
went on a spree like
they went on a
for a
drought.
while that they didn't win before the outside of X Games. They didn't win like an MLG event for until like the AW Dynasty run. So like I don't know. And end of the day, like anyone saying content has something to do with that, that's just wild to me.
I
I
think it's just
think
like a holdover from that, like not the Opt Dynasty, but like I don't know what like what would you call like the Nade Shot Big Timer Merc Scump team? Like that's like the most popular team, like from a like a content standpoint. Like I don't know what people call that team. Like that might be like OG kind of optic, but
yeah,
that team was doing too
that's the
much
house.
content.
It wasn't
Yeah,
the 60/50 house. That's
yeah,
what you
that
call
was
it.
Optic House. They were doing too much content, and that's probably why they weren't winning events. But they were playing Minecraft more than playing Call of Duty. So like those guys at that particular point, you could blame them for prioritizing content. I don't know if Shotzi and Dashi streaming like ranked play is really like
Yeah, no.
moving the needle one way or the other, especially when they just won 6 matches in qualifiers. Like I just don't think that's a thing. But I always thought, I like to bring it up because it is funny that that's kind of like anytime a Call of Duty player basically posts YouTube videos nowadays, it's like you're not focusing on playing. Like they have to be locked in on competitive 24/7. Like and a lot of it is just like they play a game and they send it to an editor and like that editor is kind of working
Yeah,
on the video. Like it's really not as as intensive as people like to make it out to be.